Welcome to our second video on mundane astrology, and this time we're looking at why world events seem to follow cycles. This is part of our introduction to global astrology playlist. Now, in the previous video, we looked at what mundane astrology actually is and how it approaches world events through planetary cycles. So in this video, I'd like to explore why cycles even matter at all and why history again and again seems to move in recognizable patterns rather than straight lines. The human tendency is to think linearly. Modern culture often teaches us to think of time as linear. We've got the past, we've got the present, we've got the future, and so it goes. But when we study history, be that political history or economic history, social history, it doesn't matter, we quickly notice something else. We see that themes repeat. Power rises, power falls, periods of expansion are followed by contraction, and certainty gives way to doubt and then to renewal, and the cycle starts all over again. Astrology is built on the understanding that time is cyclical, not linear. We're not moving from A to B, we're moving around and around like a ring, like a cycle. Cycles exist everywhere, and we don't need astrology to know this. We see cycles in the seasons. We see cycles in the tides. Biological rhythms are part of a cycle. Economic booms and economic busts are part of cycles. Most economists know this and read this. Astrology simply applies the same cyclical principle to collective human behavior. Planetary cycles act like a cosmic clock, really, marking phases of growth, phases of consolidation, breakdown, and eventually rebirth. Now, long-term planets and collective change are what mundane astrology really does focus on. They give a lot of attention to how this works, and particularly through the outer planets, Saturn, Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto, because these planets move the slowest and therefore they correspond to longer historical periods, not personal moods and whims that ebb and flow like the moon causes in our new moon phase or our full moon phase. The moon is the fastest moving planet, in inverted commas, and therefore it affects us at a more personal, mood-based level, as well as other things as well. But mostly we see it in a mood-based expression, whereas these outer planets move slowly and therefore have a lot of impact on historical periods and historical changes. And when we know the history of these changes, we can often see and forecast even the changes that may be coming to our planet. And that's what we're doing with mundane astrology. So when these planets particularly change signs, or when they form major aspects or conjunctions with other planets like this, other slow-moving planets particularly, we often see big structural shifts in governance. We see changes in economic systems. We see new ideologies emerging, and old paradigms really come crumbling down. They lose their relevance, often not instantaneously, but gradually, which is because they're slow-moving planets, it's how they work, but it's unmistakable in hindsight to see the influence that these planets have. Now, why do patterns repeat? Well, they repeat, but never exactly as in the same way as they did before. This is an important point here. Cycles repeat themes, not events. History doesn't replay itself like some film, like on a DVD or a video or, at the cinema for the millionth time. It's not a repeating image of the same old, same old. What happens is that history rhymes. So it's like a poem that rhymes with the stanza that's gone before. Each cycle brings familiar pressures, authority versus reform, stability versus change, idealism versus disillusionment. But look, each time they appear through the lens of the current era that we're in. When you think about how planets move, for example, we had a conjunction of Saturn and Neptune in Capricorn back in 1989. And in 2026, we have a conjunction of Saturn and Neptune, but this time it's in Aries. A completely different energy, a completely different paradigm, but the same kind of effect. Not the same events, but the same effect. Astrology helps us recognize which themes are being activated, not necessarily how they're going to be acted out. Let's look at astrology as context rather than astrology as prediction. And this is where astrology is often misunderstood. Mundane astrology, world astrology, doesn't say this event will happen on this date. It's really luck of the draw if an astrologer happens to get something like that right in a predictive, prophesaical sense. Instead, astrology says this is a period where tension, restructuring, or ideological shifts are likely to arise in society. And we can sort of define what those shifts might look like, or the tone they'll have, or the energy that they're going to present to humanity as a whole when that period arrives. So this context allows us to step back from panic. It allows us to avoid oversimplified narratives. It helps us understand that uncertainty is often a signal of transition. And as I record this in 2026, let's face it, we've been in this state of transition since 2020. And this is an unfolding of big planetary shifts from the outer planets. Astrologers have talked about this from the period from 2020 through to 2026. Many of them talked about it beforehand because you can predict that these cycles are going to bring transition. And that's certainly what we have been seeing for the last 6 years. Now, why this perspective is especially useful now is that we're currently living through, as I've just illustrated, 2020 to 2026, or if you're listening to this later on down the track, you may be living through an overlapping long-term cycle that might suggest systematic change rather than surface-level disruption. You might be living through a period that is suggesting a reevaluation of authority, a reevaluation of belief systems, and a reevaluation of society's collective values, what they will and won't tolerate any longer. You could be living through a long-term cycle that is dissolving structures that no longer serve their purpose and have become outworn. And when the change feels relentless and difficult, astrology reminds us that, look, this is not chaos, it's process. It's a part of the process. Now, how I'm going to work with cycles here at the World Astrology channel with Kesenya, on this channel we will return again and again to long-term planetary movements, ingress charts and eclipses, historical parallels to current cycles. So if you love history and you love astrology and you love to understand what's going on globally and collectively, then this is definitely the place for you. The aim is not to predict this event is going to happen here in this part of the world. It's about understanding where we are at in the cycle and observing how it is playing out in our world. Now, just in closing for this video, when we understand cycles, we stop expecting permanence in these temporary phases of change, and we stop fearing transitions that are actually part of this larger rhythm. They're meant to unfold. Astrology doesn't remove uncertainty, but it does offer perspective. So I want to thank you for being here and for taking the time to look beyond the immediate moment that you're in into the future of our world.